For a variety of reasons, I could not do my upload yesterday, but I am here today, and I will give you 2 chapters. Hi guys, this is Connie, back for some more Connie Reads Journey with Grief. We are on chapter 12, titled Honest to God. I began writing poetry within the first few days after Nathan's death, compelled to be unconditionally and antagonizingly honest. I lashed out with anger and frustration. Although I couldn't feel God's presence, I was angry that I was unable to distance myself from the knowledge of God's unconditional love. I felt free to express my anger, even hatred, knowing deep inside that God was with me in love and compassion, not angry with me for my words or accusations. I knew the safety net of God's presence was down there somewhere as I tumbled in my freefall of grief. A poem. I don't know if this is all the same poem. No. So we're getting one, two, three. I think we're getting 3 poems and then a next section that wraps it all up. Titled Hate. God, I hate you. I hate you. I hate you. Thank you for inviting, welcoming my raw, naked, unabashed honesty. Can't say the word honesty. God, I love you. Next one's titled Where. God, where were you? Why didn't you do something? What were you thinking? My son is dead, and I know you were watching. You were there and did nothing to save him. What were you thinking? What were you feeling? My son is dead, and I know you were there with him. This one's titled, God, You Stink. My son is dead. I hate this loss, this sadness, this ache. I hate that in the midst of my anguish, I know and experience your love, your grace, your mercy. Anger bubbles within, yet I know and experience your goodness, your care, your presence. My son is dead. I hate this. Use it for your glory and praise. I am overwhelmed by my grief, my sorrow, my loss. Use it to make me more like Jesus. God, you stink. But I love that I can be angry, upset, totally honest with you. My son is dead. I hate this, but I love you, God. This next section's titled Anger. Anger is something you may powerfully experience as you process the loss of a loved one. Your anger may be directed towards some or all of the following: the deceased, your spouse, the person, entity you view as responsible, and in parentheses it says doctor, killer, drunk driver, police, hospital, government, etc. God and even yourself. Anger is natural and should not be suppressed. Process your anger with someone who will listen and who will refrain from comment or judgment, ideally a trained therapist, pastor, spiritual director, support group, or trusted friend. Journaling can be helpful, and so can other methods of creatively expressing your feelings directly to God. God desires your honesty. Don't stuff it by ignoring your feelings, distracting yourself, or making unhealthy coping and numbing choices, e.g., traps to avoid, page 29. But rather choose to use whatever you are feeling, experiencing your emotions as a prompt to turn toward God, toward healing, and toward life. And that's the end of chapter 12. And now I think we get, they're getting shorter and shorter as we go. Chapter 13, A Critical Question. In the years since my son's death, I have repeatedly asked myself, quote, what am I currently feeling or experiencing taking me toward God, healing and life, or away from God, despair and death? This critical self-assessment is helpful in any season, but would have been invaluable during the first year following Nathan's death. My hope is you will make time to reflect on this question, at least daily, as it provides a steady base against the whiplash of grief, the onslaught of sorrow, moments of relief, debilitating rage, followed by gratitude for the memories and everything in between. At first, this self-reflection may not come easily, but I encourage you to continue as you are able. Once a week is better than not at all. Trust in the God of loaves and fish, bringing what you have, doing what you can, expecting God to receive and multiply what you offer. And it says CF Matthew 14, verses 17 through 20. Start by opening to God in honesty, acknowledging God's love for you and presence with you. God is sustaining you and weeping with you, whether you feel it or not. I wasn't surprised that some of my past emotions resurfaced during the process of writing this book, but the passage of time and emotional healing have given me new tools for this journey. I relied on the question above for stability and direction, finding Matthew 14, verses 28 through 31a encouraging. Lord, if it's you, Peter replied, tell me to come to you on the water. Come, he said. Then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water, and came toward Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid and, beginning to sink, cried out, Lord, save me. Immediately Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. Peter asked to walk on the water, and Jesus invited him to do so. Peter got out of the boat and walked on water. He did it. Quote, then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water, and came toward Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid and, beginning to sink, cried out, Lord, save me. Peter lost his focus and began to pay attention to the wind and waves to such a degree that he took his eyes off Jesus and began to sink. Now the wind and the waves were there from the beginning, but at first they were not Peter's sole focus. I'm not saying he didn't feel them, did not know that they were all around him, but he was not focused on them. For a time, his primary focus was on Jesus before he became overwhelmed by the wind and the waves. The question, is this taking me toward God or away from God? Helps you to maintain your Jesus focus in the midst of the wind and waves. It does not mean you don't feel the force of them, but rather you let what you're feeling become a reminder to go toward Jesus in the midst of the turbulence. Trust the God of loaves and fish to meet you where you are with the promise, I can work with that. He quotes God saying he can work with that. Finally, draw solace from the end of the passage. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid and beginning to sink, cried out, Lord, save me. Immediately Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. Matthew 14, 30 through 31a. Peter's experience of sinking, overwhelmed by the wind and the waves, led him to cry out to Jesus for saving. Jesus heard and responded by reaching out his hand. Although I did not have this critical question in mind in my early stages of grief, I allowed my poetry to turn me toward God. My poems shared my heart freely and honestly with God, keeping my focus on the God of life and healing. See exercises on page 81 through 83 for additional ways to process. It is important to find ways that are true to who you are. Poem titled, Why My Son? God, why my son? Why not another? Why not a child molester, a drug addict, a murderer, a devil worshiper? Why my son? He was dedicated to you as a baby, baptized as a child. He had a hopeful future. Why my son? Is it something I did, something I didn't do? Is it my punishment, the result of my past sin or my current imperfections? God, do you hear me? Are you there? Why my son? You delivered Abraham's son. You brought Lazarus back from the grave. You raised Jairus' daughter. My son is dead, still dead. Why my son? Was it too much trouble? Were you too busy? Did you have a wager going with Satan? Is this some kind of test, a way of seeing if I truly love you? Why my son? And that's the end of chapter 13. I'm curious to take out. Let's see what page 81 through 83 says. It's chapter 24, which is take care of yourself. So there's a lot of things that I'm reading over. Wow, there's a lot of Basics, exercises, lots of exercises, reminders of Jeremiah and Lamentations. Okay, so that is a chapter in the future. Be careful with that and enjoy, please and thank you, and I will see you for the next upload. Have a great one. Bye.